Thank you so much for joining. My name is Janette Roush. I am the SVP of Innovation and Chief AI Officer for Brand USA. If you're not familiar with us, we are the destination marketing organization for the United States. We focus on driving international inbound visitation to the US. I want to assuage any fears that you have that this might be dry or not useful. I'm including the image that you see of the Play-Doh version of Janette getting squished because I have seen a lot of AI presentations, and I know a lot of them are just a list of all the tricks and tips that you can do, but you don't actually see anything useful that you can then take back to your office and use for work. So while I think the fun stuff is fun, and if you want to make one of these on your own, it is free at pika.art. pika.art. But for the rest of the presentation, it's going to be more on practical use cases. So we're talking very briefly with an overview of what are large language models like ChatGPT and others. We're going to walk through the basics of putting together a prompt. I'm then going to tell you how to cheat using AI. That's where I'm going to walk through a couple of case studies so you can see what this looks like in action. And then we're going to wrap up with some tips for how you can continue to incorporate AI work into the stuff you do every day. So to get us started, what is ChatGPT? It is one version of a large language model, and ChatGPT is the interface that allows you to communicate with that large language model. The large language model itself might be called GPT-4 or any number of other names I'll go through a little bit later in the presentation. None of that is what you really need to focus on if you are new to working with AI. You just need to remember that similar to how Amazon's Alexa device is a conduit that allows you to communicate with a number of small AIs in the background, that's what we're doing with ChatGPT. There's other ways that you can communicate with a large language model. Like if you're a developer, you might use APIs to do that. But we are only worried about that text interface right now. And what's happening behind the scenes is that this is just a giant algorithm, right? OpenAI and these other companies, they went out to the internet, they stole every single word of the human language that has ever been written, and then they used math to predict what word comes next in the sentence. Some sentences are pretty easy, like Mary had a little blank. We can guess that lamb might be that last word in the sentence. But for other sentences, it's figured out an algorithm to predict possible answers for all of them. And how it knows what answer to give you is based on context clues. So if it sees the word bacon, it is looking in a multi-dimensional space where words are grouped together. And there's one grouping in this multi-dimensional space that is going to be all about breakfast foods. And there's another grouping in this space that is all about movie actors. Using context clues is how the language models know if that word bacon, if you are talking about Kevin Bacon, or if you are talking about having bacon for breakfast. And when we're working with this, because it's just predicting the likely next word in a sentence, we need to remember that this is not a database of facts. ChatGPT is not checking Wikipedia before giving a response. It is using math to determine what answer might make you happy. Part of what we'll discuss today is how you can let ChatGPT and similar tools know that what will make you happy is actually a truthful answer and not something that's been hallucinated. And when we're getting ready to use these tools, I think the scariest part of them is this very unhelpful screen that, what can I help with? And you're like, I don't know. So that's what we're going to focus on first. How do you get past that fear of the blank prompt? A great use case is writing content or copy. It's very rarely, hey, write this entire thing for me. It's more likely to be rephrase a sentence for me. Take a really long bio, make it shorter. Don't take the short bio and ask for it to be made longer, because that is an invitation for the model to hallucinate, to make up an answer that it thinks might make you happy. It's also excellent at working with data because, again, it's looking to find patterns in data. That is what the original algorithm does that determine what word in the sentence might make you happy. So if you are working with Excel, you can ask for what information is contained in your spreadsheet. And that could use uploading the spreadsheet to ChatGPT. Or if there's private information, you could copy just a few rows of it, paste those rows into ChatGPT, remove anything you don't want to share, and explain the formula you are trying to write. And it will give you suggestions on that formula for how you can, it could even write it for you and tell you what cell to put it in. It becomes a much more useful tool than going through the Microsoft Excel help menu or trying to search for the answer online. Now we're at the interactive part. So please, the QR code just takes you to ChatGPT. If you already have that open, go straight to ChatGPT or the AI tool you typically use. So that could be Gemini from Google, that could be Claude from Anthropic, Microsoft Copilot. So go to a website where you can use ChatGPT, that could be chat.com. And if you're using your phone, I would like you to take a picture of the screen. And that's another fast tip for working with AI is that you don't necessarily have to type anything. These tools are multimodal, so you can talk to them if that's easier and faster for you. And it can read words that are inside of images. What I like about this prompt, and I hope you will email me or contact me on LinkedIn after this presentation and let me know what your response was. But I want to illustrate that where ChatGPT really shines is on questions that could have infinite answers. Because there's no right or wrong answer to what kind of campaign could turn Minnesota's winter weather into a tourism asset. Like, that's not a yes or no, that there's any number of responses for that. And so this is an opportunity to see that in action. Every single person on this webinar gets a different response for this prompt. Whereas if you think about questions that only have one correct answer, like what is the weather or what was the score of the game yesterday, that is still an excellent use case for Google because that is where you were going to be able to check sources and see where that one true answer is. So now I'm going to teach you how to cheat on papers. Like, I like to give this example because it shows how I think you should approach writing using AI. The way we think college students cheat on their homework is just open up ChatGPT and give it the assignment, right? Write a 6-page close reading of the Iliad. But if you're a good cheater, what you actually do is say, I need to write a 6-page close reading of the Iliad. Give me options for thesis statements. What makes that different is that the student in this case is breaking down the task into smaller chunks. The best use cases you will find for using these tools is when you are able to take your own process and break it out into component steps. So here, great, we have some options for thesis statements. It suggests writing about the role of women in the Iliad. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So now what's the next step in that process? You write an outline. Ask ChatGPT to write that outline for you. And now you have something to react to. You can look at it and make changes. There's no law that says you're required to write anything that ChatGPT gives you, right? It's a partner for us. It is not our boss. It gives you the opportunity to remember we can't take these things at face value. One of the sentences it gave me in this outline was that Helen of Troy caused the Trojan War because she was too beautiful. And I thought about that and I'm like, well, I don't want to write a paper about that. Maybe it is the fault of the men for fighting over the pretty girl, and maybe they're the ones who caused the war. So push back on the language model and say, I don't think I agree with that. And then because it's very, sycophantic, it wants to make you happy. So, oh my goodness, you're so right. How smart of you. Thank you. Here's the new take for that paragraph. And if you were to go and write a paper using these tips from ChatGPT, it's going to be completely in your own words, right? That's going to be the student's own work. But I want to remind us all that when we are at work, we're not students necessarily. And so for our jobs, it is not cheating to use AI. And that is one of the things that live in the back of our heads that I want to help us overcome. In many cases, I know many of the folks on this call work for DMOs. We're nonprofits. So I think we have a responsibility as stewards of public funding to make sure that we are using it in the best way possible, that we are not spending 7 hours to do a task that AI could help you do in 7 minutes. And for commercial companies, think about this from an agency model. If you hire a lawyer, do you want to pay the law firm for 7 hours of discovery work that could have happened in 7 minutes? Maybe right now that answer is yes, but I think we're seeing that answer change. And part of that change is us realizing that AI isn't cheating. Now I'm going to walk through an example of how you can create campaign strategy using AI. We are going to take the approach of looking at this step by step. If you are making a campaign, what are the goals of the campaign? Do you have research to understand your target audiences? Have you done a SWOT analysis? Do you have a clear, unique selling proposition? So having a clear process really helps you to get the most use out of ChatGPT. The way to get started with any process that you want to be grounded in truth is you don't want to trust whatever is, in the underlying knowledge of this data, underlying data of the large language model. You want to give it the information that you consider to be the truth. You want to prime that prompt. What does that look like? Here in this example, I am walking through a campaign that I worked on for New York City tourism a year ago around America 250 and how is the city going to celebrate the 400th anniversary of New York City and the 250th anniversary of the United States. So how do you want to start? Find research. It's still at Google. So Google, even though they're making changes that incorporate AI into their work as well, Google hasn't gone anywhere. It still exists and it serves a different function than doing that same search in a tool like ChatGPT. So go Google for these sources of research. Another great tool you might not be familiar with is a search engine called Perplexity. I think it's perplexity.ai. And Perplexity is a search engine built entirely around AI. Most of the language models offer some version of this. You can do search, natively inside of ChatGPT, inside of Claude, obviously inside of Google's Gemini. Perplexity just has a different way that they have wrapped everything together. I think it's really interesting the work that they do when you are looking for sources of research. And you can see that I have found 5 different sources from Perplexity. That gives me an opportunity to download the answers. Because just like in AI overviews on Google search, when you put in a search query in the prompt window, you're going to get back an answer to your question, and then you will get some footnotes with those sources. And then I think a really interesting tool is called Google's Notebook. This is baked into the Google Gemini plan now. I think they might still have a free version, but it's very cool because it allows you to create what they call notebooks. And you can see here, I have a variety of notebooks on different topics. Here, this is the opportunity you have. You upload all of your files. In this instance, I was uploading files with research. Who travels for heritage? Who travels for culture? Like, what would these target audiences for heritage tourism look like for New York City? And you are able to ask questions about your sources. It's giving me an answer about how the travel motivations for a heritage traveler and a cultural traveler are different. And it's giving me citations. When I click on one of these citations, it opens up the source that I was looking at, and it will highlight the part of the source that it used to answer the question. For anything that needs to be very grounded in truth, this is helpful. It was created by a division in Google that was looking at products that would support students and researchers. So it wasn't meant initially to be a commercial product. But you may have heard of it in last October because they came out with a podcast. So not only can you ask questions of all of your sources, but you can press a button and it will generate a 10 to 15-minute podcast that sounds very natural talking about your material. You can now make edits to that podcast. You can interrupt the podcasters and ask them questions, and they will have a conversation with you. Notebook LM will make a mind map out of topics contained in all of the source material you upload. So, really cool tool. Let's say we have all of this information loaded into Notebook LM, or you can even upload it to ChatGPT or the tool of your choice. It's given you a primed prompt. As now, all of the other elements that I outlined, you can use this prompt to help you with. So, looking at the competitive landscape, when New York City is thinking about, America 250, we knew that we were in a slightly different competitive place in the market than Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, or Boston. And that's because New York City tore down a lot of our old stuff. But we knew that we're still a very important player in what happened 250 years ago. Use ChatGPT to spell out what does that competitive landscape look like. Have it help you outline and define your target audiences. Then move on to the steps of writing the brief for your creative team or ad agency. So look at what problem does the creative team need to solve? What is the objective of this campaign? And then I used all of this information to put together a really good creative brief for the New York City Tourism, their in-house creative team. There's no rule that says that AI has to do everything for us, and AI has to do the part of our job that's the most important or that we value the most or enjoy doing the most. Humans came together and did a lot of work to write the positioning statement for Founded by NYC, which is the campaign that ultimately came out of this work. Typically, I don't think I put that much work or energy into putting together a great creative brief in the past. So again, yes, maybe this sped up work and maybe it didn't, but I wasn't looking at it as an exercise to make things as fast as possible. For me, this was an opportunity to do more thorough, more thoughtful work than I had done in the past. And so remember, AI is a great partner for that type of work as well. So now I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about watchouts and governance. What do we need to be concerned with when we are using AI tools at work? First, we need to think about how do we keep our information secure, safe, and with integrity. These are topics that I'm going to address a lot on future webinars. As you may have read in one of the emails about this, the Agents of Change webinar is going to be a series. I'm looking at doing it approximately every other week. We're going to flip between practical use cases and looking more at the strategic layer. In future strategic webinars, I'm going to focus a lot more on things like AI safety and what kind of systems we need to set up so that our staff, our teams are using AI appropriately at our organizations. But to give a top line overview of this information, data security, making sure that the information you put into a tool like ChatGPT, that it can't be, stolen by bad actors. And the easiest way to make sure that you are protecting data is to use a paid version of an AI tool. It's very likely you have heard the saying that if you're not paying for a product, the product is you. It's still true. And if you're using a free version of a tool like ChatGPT, it probably has training the underlying model turned on. What does that mean? Anything that you put into a language model is traveling to the cloud. The language model takes your prompt, puts it into the language model, and generates this response that it then sends back to you. ChatGPT, like OpenAI, they are looking for more information to train future models. Now, if you are using it for free, They're saying, great, we're happy to have you as a free user, but it costs us money. So we're going to monetize your participation in this system by taking everything you put in and every file that you upload, and we're going to use that to make the next version of ChatGPT even better. So that's not necessarily something we want to do with our private work documents. When you get a paid account, you are given the option to turn off model training on your information. And that's really important when using these tools for work. Or if you're using it for personal use cases and it's something you don't necessarily want to share. So you want to have that training turned off. And you also want to have SOC 2 compliance on your data. That just means when your data is traveling to the cloud and when your data is at rest in the cloud, it is protected to make it harder for hackers to access. If you have heard of HIPAA, which applies to healthcare protocols, it's the same thing. HIPAA is more stringent than SOC 2. But for corporate use cases, SOC 2 is going to be fine. And this is the kind of thing that you want to have a conversation about with your IT department, of course. Next, I want to talk about data privacy. Here, we want to protect people. If you look at GDPR and the EU AI Act, they consider data to be owned by the person whose data it is. Whenever you get somebody's personally identifiable information, their PII, like email addresses, mailing addresses, that belongs to the person and they can allow you to use it, but they also get the opportunity to revoke your use of it. PII and language models are tricky because once something goes into the underlying training data of a language model, it can never be removed. It is part of the algorithm and it's there permanently. We don't want to upload people's information into a language model unless they have given us explicit consent. It is okay with them that we do that. So we are very rarely getting the consent of anybody who is an EU resident before, having access to their data. So the best use case here is don't put personally identifiable information into a language model. Even if you have a paid instance and you have the training turned off, it would still be a violation of the EU AI Act. The final piece of this is content integrity. This goes through the question of what is okay to put into a language model. In a couple of weeks, when I do the presentation on AI for leaders, I'm going to spend more time focusing on content integrity and things to be concerned with. But it's another sign that we want to make sure we are using versions of these models that have the training turned off, because you don't want every single confidential company document to become part of the underlying frontier models that power tools like ChatGPT. Other things that we need to be concerned with when using language models. Hallucinations. I touched on this at the beginning, that these tools are just putting words in a particular order with the hope that it will make you happy. This is from a couple of years ago. So I will say hallucinations, this kind of thing has gotten a lot better in the last 2 years, particularly since search has been baked into tools like ChatGPT. So if I were to do this search now or ask for it to write a bio of me now, it knows that I am asking it something that is not in its underlying data, and it's going to go online and search for me and use that information to write the bio of me. But before it had internet access and it was only using underlying information in the language model, I had asked it to write a haiku on early morning Amtrak rides because that's what I was doing at the moment. The next prompt, I asked for it to write a bio for Janette Roush. And every single word on here is made up. So I am not an accomplished academic. I don't have a PhD. I didn't study tourism management, didn't go to Cornell or work at Amtrak or any of these things. So ChatGPT just went to town having some fun. We have to be careful to make sure that even in more subtle ways, GPT isn't making something up. So whenever you have AI write something for you, you have to be the fact checker. We may see our jobs pivot in that direction, where instead of spending as much time doing the writing, we may be the ones spending more of our time doing the editing, doing the fact checking, making sure that this is what we want to share with the world. Bias is also a concern when you are working with language models. They were trained on all of the information from across the internet. It was that all that was written by humans. Humans have bias. So the output of language models, it is based on human writing. So it is going to contain bias. Just like the example earlier from cheating on papers, that reflects a particular bias that Helen of Troy caused the Trojan War because she was too beautiful, right? Typically, all writing is going to have some form of bias in it. If you look at most language models, many of the ones that we use most commonly are created in the United States, and they're trained primarily on English language text. There is some kind of bias baked into those systems that's going to be very American centric. And so if you are writing from the point of view of another country, you want to keep an eye out for those biases that are going to be baked into the language. People are working on addressing this, but ultimately, it is our responsibility to make sure that the output we share reflects our own point of view. Sustainability is a very big topic when it comes to AI. Sam Altman was speaking on this recently. None of the AI companies have been very forthright about exactly how much energy their tools use. The issue is that the enormous data centers that create the underlying models that crunch through all of the information ever written on the internet, those models need a ton of water to cool down the computers doing that work. Inherently, it is not a terribly sustainable thing to create and use language models. Sam Altman came out maybe a day ago and said it takes 1/15th of a teaspoon, I believe, of water to power essentially one query into ChatGPT. It's hard for me to be able to tell you right off the bat exactly what does that mean if you were comparing it to Netflix usage or an hour of playing on a PlayStation. My point of view on the sustainability issue is that it's really important for people to understand how AI works, and that means using it a lot. I think everybody should be using AI a lot more than we are using it right now, because that's what it takes to really understand how it works, to get proficient with it so that you have big ideas for how to use it later on. The reason that we do all of this work is so that we can build bigger things with AI, right? The end goal of AI is not necessarily to rewrite an email for me. If I am learning AI now and will create software that uses AI in the future, I want to understand all of the different models and how much energy those different models use. That will help me on a corporate level pick the most sustainable, least invasive version of an AI tool to power whatever I'm doing. And so to have that knowledge, you just have to have experience using AI. Ultimately, what we do as individual contributors is very small in the world of sustainability. What happens on that corporate level is going to be much more impactful. So become educated now. When you are a decision maker at that corporate level, you can steer the models into ones that are less expensive. What makes them less expensive is that they use less resources, they use less energy and less water to work. So now I'm going to walk through setting up your ChatGPT account. So again, if you're pretty new to ChatGPT and you have a second screen, go ahead and have that open, because I'll give you a few tips that will help make the outputs you get better. So first, you'll see that over here on the right side of the screen, that's going to be the menu for where you see all of the controls and settings for ChatGPT. So for this first bit, I'm going to go to customize ChatGPT. And that brings up this window where you get to tell ChatGPT things you want it to know about yourself. I find it very helpful to let it know who I am, where I work, all of this information about what I am trying to do. That saves me from explaining over and over again what my job title is or what it means or what is a DMO. All of that I have baked at a instructions level for ChatGPT. Here for what traits should ChatGPT have, you can click on these buttons and it will populate inside of the what traits should ChatGPT have box. And I've put in a couple of these things on my own. So I tell it don't use M dashes or it's also about this kind of sentence construction that we're seeing a lot on LinkedIn and some other places right now. I don't want to ever see that sentence construction. So I have put it as an instruction here. It's good to know that when we're giving instructions to ChatGPT, it can be a little bit funny. If I were to tell you, don't think about pink elephants, you're going to picture a pink elephant, right? ChatGPT can do the same thing. It doesn't see the not as much as it just says M dashes. It's not X, it's Y. And so it's possible it might actually focus a little more on those prompts when you call its attention to it. If doing these instructions doesn't always work, that's the reason why. Now I'm looking at the settings. So this is still inside the ChatGPT settings menu. When you go to data controls, that's when you see the option improve the model for everyone. What that means is that ChatGPT is taking everything that you put into it and using that to train a future model. So if you're doing anything private or confidential, you want to have that set to off. And that you will see people making fun of this online because it's pretty ridiculous at this point how many different things there are and how similar they all look and how on earth are you supposed to know which ones are you meant to use. This will all get solved at some point because OpenAI will release GPT-5. And they claim their hope is that GPT-5 will encompass all of these models and it will automatically detect which one to use to answer your question, and you won't have to pick one anymore. But in the meantime, I would say GPT-4 is the most useful tool. The only other one that I would really worry about at this point, honestly, if you have access to O3 Pro, I would try that. But all of these reasoning models are going to be basically the same. O3 Pro just was released widely over the weekend, so that's the newest, hottest thing. I would use that type of model on something that you need a lot of thought put into, right? Because it's the difference between those models and something like GPT-4 is that it's thinking through many different possible responses. And if you remember Choose Your Own Adventure books, where you follow along and make a choice, and you can skip ahead to page 116 if you choose this, and page 222 if you make the other choice. So it's moving along a decision tree and then backtracking if it doesn't like the ultimate destination it gets to. And so it's following this chain of thought reasoning process to determine the best answer to your question. And so if you have something like the creating a campaign example that I showed earlier, that is something that I would do in one of the reasoning models. If I am looking for help rewriting an email, I'm going to use 4.0 for that. Something else I think is very useful to be aware of, custom GPTs. So one of the great jokes of working with AI is that the name for everything is horrible. So we're supposed to know, what is a custom GPT and how is that different from Chat GPT? And OpenAI doesn't even always call these custom GPTs. So it makes it difficult to talk about in a webinar. But when it comes to how do you practically use a tool like ChatGPT, they're very helpful. And if you use Gemini, it's called Gems inside of Gemini. You will find custom GPTs here. If you're familiar with the left rail on your Chat GPT account, click on GPTs. And then here it's bringing up something that really the best analogy for it is thinking of Apple's App Store. You can see all the different categories of prompts that have been pre-written for you. That's really interesting because there are people who are much better at certain types of prompts than I am. So you can explore and see what other people have created. Truthfully, I only use the ones that our team has made or that I have made. If you have a team account and a ChatGPT team account, I think this is the best path forward if you do not have a paid, secure AI tool in place yet. One of the great things is it allows you to share GPTs across your organization. Here, I have made a custom GPT for our travel and expense policy. In the background, I have given a prompt to ChatGPT that says, here is a copy of our 40-page, PDF file that has our expense policy in it. And whenever somebody asks you a question, this is how I want you to address the question. And I will say in this example, this is one of the first things I made when I started at Brand USA. And we've been updating it over the last 8 months because occasionally it stops working correctly. AI is funny. Think of it as that quirky, incredibly smart intern who doesn't know anything about who you are or what you do. So sometimes they change the underlying model and it changes the way that your prompts worked for these custom GPTs. I had to go in and write the prompt to be more strict because Alexis on our events team asked about the per diem for Chicago and it gave her the wrong answer. And so I used the deep research function of ChatGPT, which I'll talk about in future webinars, to upload where the mistakes were and say, help me understand, like, this is pretty simple. How could this have gotten it wrong? And it turns out that because Chicago is not explicitly spelled out in our expense policy, our custom GPT said, oh, wait a second. Chicago is kind of an expensive city. It shouldn't be tier one. It should be higher than tier one. And it gave the wrong answer very confidently to Alexis. We went back and rewrote the rules to say, no, you must very explicitly follow the instructions of the PDF. I used ChatGPT to help me write those instructions. And then here we have the perfect single prompt that easily answers the questions that you have. We have a question in the chat about the different use cases for a project versus a custom GPT. So a custom GPT, it's really, and I will tell you, there's a lot of overlap and you can do a lot of the same things in a custom GPT that you can do in a project. What a project does, and this is where you're going to find projects inside of ChatGPT. I don't have very many, or I only have this one set up right now because I use Claude for all of my project work. If you want to use a project, you're going to start by clicking on New Project. And then this is what a project looks like. You can upload files, which is also something you can do in a custom GPT. You can give it instructions. In a custom GPT, you are giving it a prompt, whereas the instructions in a project are less of a direct prompt. You create the prompt using the prompt window, but you're just telling it overall, what is the goal of you having all of this information in one place? And then what really makes this different is every time I start a chat in the future of the project, that chat is going to get filed inside of that project. So if you see over here, back in my threads, those two chats that I've had about the future of DMOs inside that project, I don't find them down here. I find them up here in the folder. So the best use case for this is just helping you be a little more organized. If you use a custom GPT, you open it up by coming over here and you find the custom GPT area and you just click on it. But every time you do it, it is just a new blank prompt. And that's because if I'm asking about our per diem in Chicago, The next time I use it, I'm asking about the per diem in Washington, D.C. I don't need to access the history of my chat. I'm using this specifically because I do want to access my chat history. And so now before Q&A, I am going to look at what are the next steps that everyone can take advantage of. What are the things that you need to be thinking about on your AI journey? So first, please stay focused on your mission. We want to look at what problems are we solving for our stakeholders? How can generative AI help us do this better or faster? We want to remember that AI is a tool. It is not the solution to the problem. And when we're looking at organizational change and how do we all move forward with AI adoption, there's two approaches and we need to do them both at the same time. It's top down and it is bottom up, and you cannot choose between them. You have to have both. So for any leadership that's on this call, make an AI committee. The idea here is that we need to get AI use out of the shadows. If people are finding ways to save time or do things better, we need to share what those ideas are. We need to adopt guidelines for generative AI use. How do you deal with people uploading proprietary data? And the way you deal with it is your organization needs to have guidelines that outlines what is okay and what is not okay to put in a large language model. On the next webinar, I don't have the date off the top of my head. So Allie, maybe you can put that in the chat. For the next webinar, we're going to go pretty in depth on AI guidelines and what should you put in. Ultimately, and that's going to be different for every company, because every company is going to have a different risk profile when it comes to working with IP. Everyone is going to have different contracts with vendors. But one of the things we need to think about is, if you are asking yourself, is it okay to put this into a language model? You need to think about, is it a secure account or not? Because the secure accounts have training turned off. Or is it a free account where anything you enter would be kind of subsumed into the model? So you want training turned off, and then you want to look at those contracts, because if you are buying proprietary research, it might be okay legally to put that into a language model. If you're buying syndicated research, there may be a clause that says you cannot share this research with a third party. And ChatGPT is a third party. So in those instances, rather than saying, shoot, well, I guess I can't do it, have the conversation. Research companies want us to use their research. This is an excellent way to make sure that it is being used to inform your strategy. Fantastic use case, but you want to make sure that you're doing that properly. And then the bottom up approach. So for the individual contributors, how can you get better at using these tools? I will say what I did when I first started working with AI. I'm not a technologist. I came to this as a very curious person, but my background is I'm a theater major. So I promise you that you do not need to have some kind of special tech background in order to get amazing things out of working with these tools. You just have to do it. So in January of 2023, when ChatGPT was new and I wanted to understand what it could be good for, I opened it up on my second screen. And once a day, I would just ask myself if there's some way that AI could help me do this thing. And I'd try. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. But either way, I learned something. And then I would share what I learned on LinkedIn, because I knew not enough people were sharing what they were learning about AI. Using it for things you may not think are the perfect use case. I have heard that this might be a Gen X kind of issue with using AI, is that, and I clearly it wasn't true for me, and I'm the Gen Xiest, but everybody says, oh, no, I'm a big fan of AI, very happy to use AI. I'm just waiting until I have the right thing, and then I'm going to do it. The right thing doesn't exist. The people who invented these models have no idea how they work. they don't know what they can do. They're certainly not worrying about how, the tourism industry or DMOs are working with their tools. So that's why we need to share our ideas, because we have to build the use cases together. We have to make that user manual because nobody is going to make it for us. And I want to thank everybody so much for joining today. Thank you so much for dialing in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.